All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Holics podcast. This is episode 2 of the NFL season. There's not really a lot going on right now, obviously, with the whole coronavirus stuff, just sports in general. But we wanted to put out a good show here for you guys, keep the NFL shows moving along weekly. So, what we're going to talk about today is we started a new Dynasty League. They kicked off earlier this week, and we're about halfway through the draft. Actually, we're about a quarter of the way through the draft. It's a very, very deep benches, very deep rosters. So, a lot of the most of the skill positions in our meat and potatoes of our lineups are pretty much drafted already. We're just getting into the IDPs and our bench guys. So we're gonna kind of break that down a little bit. We're not gonna get too much in depth with that, but kind of give you guys an idea of where players are falling right now. A lot of the big name free agents are signed to teams now, so. And a lot of other free agents are either talking or it's going to be closer to the season before they sign. So we kind of have an idea of what rosters are looking like without the rookies. And then we had a contest that we were running on our page, the Fantasy Holics page, that we are going to pull the winner today. I have the names of everybody that entered. We're just going to do a random online random organizer that's going to pull the name, and we'll announce that, and then we'll get in contact with you. We're going to talk about some other leagues that you can get into this year if you just want to try something new outside of your dynasty, outside of your redraft. Some cool leagues that we tried last year, and we're going to continue to do. Your best ball, your vampire guillotine, and anything else that we could think of. So we'll kind of go over the rules for those and what the strategy and stuff for those are. And finally, we have another contest on our page going on right now. We'll explain that a little bit later. So first, let's start with our fantasy league that we got going on. We started a 12-team dynasty, full point PPR, really deep benches. I think it was 15 bench, one quarterback, two running backs. We play three wide receivers, one tight end, two flex, not super flex, so no second quarterback, one kicker, one defense, and then one defensive lineman, one linebacker, and one defensive back. So throwing a little bit of IDPs in there, playing a full defense still. We didn't eliminate the kicker like a lot of people want to do. We're keeping them going because kickers are people too.
Kickers matter.
Kickers do matter. You win your week on a last second Monday night field goal and piss your opponent off. Um, but like I mentioned, we're about into round 10 right now. Still some very good names left on the board. But just breaking it down, I guess we'll just start at the beginning. We won't break down every pick, but we'll just go over and kind of just back and forth. If you think that there was a pick that you didn't agree with or why you picked where you picked, we'll just talk about that. So the obvious number one was Christian McCaffrey. Although if I had number one, I would probably go Saquon Barkley. I just like his opportunity better this year. I know Teddy Bridgewater just came in to Carolina, so when I first made my rankings, Bridgewater wasn't there yet, and I had Barkley just as the clear cut number one over Christian McCaffrey, which sounds insane because of the past two seasons that McCaffrey's put together. I just like Barkley's upside a little bit more this year. He doesn't have as much wear and tear on him as McCaffrey does over the last 2 years. I still think McCaffrey's going to be a top 2, 3 player this year. There's no doubt, and I don't think you could go wrong either way. I just think that the Giants they're putting together a nice team there. There is a lot more passing options for Carolina. They just went out and signed Robbie Anderson, so they got three really good pass catchers there for Teddy Bridgewater. So the ball's going to be spread out a little bit more there as opposed to New York. So I'm taking Barkley one, but in this draft, McCaffrey went one, Barkley went two. Then we had our first wide receiver off the board, Michael Thomas at three, DeAndre Hopkins at four. Neither of those are very surprising. No surprising picks so far yet. And then Jordan, you had your first pick, so I'll let you talk about it and why you went that way.
Yeah, sure. So I took Zeke fifth overall. I'm not completely crazy about Zeke. He's 26 now. He has a ton of carries over the span of his career. I'm just an old school fantasy player, I guess, when it comes to running backs. We were talking about this earlier. I'm very surprised as we go through this, the amount of wide receivers that went early. I still think that running back is a pretty shallow position. And I think having three top tier clear cut backs is really advantageous. So I went between Zeke and Cook. I mean, Cook had the huge season. I think 2 years younger than Zeke, maybe only a year. But, there's still the injury concern there. So I decided to go with Zeke. I always try to go with a running back. I considered Nick Chubb as well. His usage in the passing game doesn't really entice me, Nick Chubb. Uh, Kareem Hunt takes some of those third down opportunities away. So I think Zeke is a clear cut number one. And even though for me in a dynasty, I always like to try to combine playing the long term with taking guys that are going to get me points now. I think Zeke with my first pick is a guy that's going to get me a ton of points for another year or two. I'm going to probably try to sell him before his value gets too low. But early on, I'm looking for a guy that I know is going to get me solid points.
It was a good pick. Excuse me. I think Chubb could have been a good pick there too. Cook, you mentioned his injury history, but also the potential for a holdout too. Now this is a dynasty, so I mean you're not picking just to play 1 year, but he might not. Not that he might not play this year, but there's always that small chance that he might not play this year, or at least like half the year, or do the Zeke Elliott route where he just kind of scares you up until the beginning of the season. Um, but yeah, he ended up going in the first round anyways. He went at 10. But after you went Chubb, so you were kind of between those guys, then Chris Godwin went at 1-7, Kamara, Adams, Dalvin Cook. And then it was me, Josh Jacobs, um, at 111, which the more we do these pods and the more we go on, you're going to see that I'm going to have a lot of 11 and 12 picks because that's just how the randomizer does it to me. I always end up with
That's
late
life.
picks.
What are you going to do?
And I make it work, but it would be nice to have like different teams every once in a while instead of having the same guys fall to me in the same spots. But I don't mind it. I started out my team pretty nice. I like the way it's going so far, even into round 11. So I'm not complaining about it. But I ended up getting Josh Jacobs. I really was only between a couple guys here. I knew I wanted to go with a running back. I really didn't want Cook, so I'm kind of happy that he went before me at 10. But if it was down to Cook or Joe Mixon or Jacobs, I was probably going Jacobs out of those three. And then obviously I went Jacobs out of Jacobs and Mixon because Cook was taken already. If it was between Cook and Mixon, I probably would have went Mixon. But I was kind of between those three, and then I knew I wanted to get a wide receiver on the way back, which I ended up doing. But there really wasn't another running back up in those tiers for me that I was going to grab. A guy that you like went at 2-4. I'll let you talk about him. Derrick Henry, I think, is going to get a boost this year. He went in the second round, but I wasn't really thinking about any of those guys. Tyreek Hill went at 112. And then Joe Mixon went at 2-1. Now, if he would have fell to 2-2 for me, I probably would have went him there and then kind of just faded the wide receivers for the first two rounds, but he didn't. So I ended up going with Mike Evans, which I'm very comfortable having as my wide receiver one, especially with Tom Brady down, Tom Brady down there. I'm seeing a lot of where he's not going to be catching those deep balls anymore. But I mean, Tom Brady, he's not a slouch. He's still slinging at 42 years old. Chris Godwin might be the favorite there now, but Mike Evans is still going to get his 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns, and I'd be very happy with that. Before we get further into the second round, any surprising first round picks? Anything that you might have done differently if you picked an X spot or anything like that?
I don't think so. I think overall, people took players that I would expect them to take. I already mentioned that I tend to take running backs earlier. Um, one guy, Joe Mixon, going. I'll talk quickly about Joe Mixon because I know everybody's on the Joe Mixon hype train. So he went with the first pick of the second round, and I'm not 100% on the Mixon hype train, and we were texting back and forth about this the one day. There's no doubt to me that he's super talented. This has nothing to do with talent, but it's more just his usage. His usage compared to a lot of bell cow backs is lower than you would think. It's a little bit because he struggles in pass protection.
Yep.
Giovanni Bernard, who a lot of people don't really talk about, and he's not really fantasy relevant, but he's a really good real life running back, and that's why the Bengals keep bringing him back year in and year out. So when you look at Joe Mixon's usage, I can't remember his snap percentage off the top of my head, but it's a good 15% lower than a lot of the bell cow backs in the NFL. Now, there's no doubt if he does get to that snap percentage, he will be, a top 5 running back. But until I see that, I'm hesitant. I'll take him as my second running back. If I had a back end pick like you did, if I had Josh Jacobs as my RB1, I'd be comfortable with Mixon as my second. But If I took Tyreek Hill like we did in the last spot here, having Mixon as my RB1 it makes me nervous, and I know everybody's on that hype train, but I'm one where I'm hesitant still.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely the numbers don't lie. Mixon is a good back, but I definitely see where you're coming from. And if he's not on the field on third down, or if Gio Bernard's getting a lot of the third down pass catching opportunities, especially in PPR, it's definitely going to kind of steer you away from Joe Mixon. Um, I would have loved to have the Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs combo, but like I said, I'm happy with the Josh Jacobs Mike Evans combo. I was just trying to do a quick count here and try to see where we're at up into the 14th pick overall, or the 15th pick overall. We got 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 running backs, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wide receivers. So up to pick 2.4, we're almost at an even split: 8 running backs, 7 wide receivers, which is it's kind of unheard of. But I mean, none of these players are really sticking out more than others, and it's kind of going like, I mean, these players are going to go in most drafts in these top 15 picks, just maybe in a different order. Um, Next up is a guy that you were hoping would fall a few picks to you, Miles Sanders. You were talking to me about him. I'll let you, if you want to talk about him a little bit, you can. If you want to hold on to your strategy just so other people don't hear it, that's fine too.
No, never. So yeah, Miles Sanders went with the fourth pick here in the second round. He's a guy, so I've taken him I actually did another dynasty draft not too long ago, 10 team. I had the ninth pick, and I took Lamar. It was two QB, so Lamar Jackson fell to me at 9, and then on the way back, with the second pick there in the second round, I actually took Miles Sanders, and I've talked to you pretty significantly about this, but he's a guy too. He didn't start early on in the season. He gets that he gets a ton of pass catching opportunities. I believe he had right around 1,300 yards last year, and that's without him starting. That's without high snap percentages. That's with Jordan Howard there. Now you have Jordan Howard who's gone. Miles Sanders is going to be on the field even more. I mean, I think that's a guy that easily between receiving and rushing is going to have 1,600 yards. Give him 10 touchdowns, and he's my sleeper to be a top 3-4 back this season. I'll stick by that, especially if his usage goes up. We'll see if they add any other backs to their backfield, but right now it's Miles Sanders. I don't really see anyone else competing, and if he's able to stay on the field like Saquon, for example, who I believe is on the field for about 85% of the snaps, I mean, he's going to put up huge numbers. He was right about at 60% last season. So if you include him being on the field 25% more, that's going to equal big time numbers. So I'm all in on Miles Sanders this year. And
Yeah,
he's young too in dynasty leagues.
very young, and he also does kick returns too. Now, if they plan on him being the bell cow, they might take those duties away from him a little bit. But if he's back there returning kicks, if you get points, I mean, you definitely get points for.
So in my second round pick, I decided to take Austin Eckler, and you and I have talked at length about him previously. I'm not crazy about Eckler. I think he's going to be a guy, if he gets he almost had 1,000 receiving yards last year. If he gets 90 catches, I don't expect him to get that kind of volume in the passing game every year, but even if he gets 1,400 total yards, 70 catches, that's a huge year in PPR formats. He's still going to be a top 10 running back, I think, in my opinion. So even though I don't love him, he's not a bell cow back. They don't really have anybody else there right now. However, I think that he's a very safe pick. And like I said before, I tend to take my chances later in dynasty drafts, throw some darts at wide receivers and really try to pick upside there. But I really want some safe running backs on the top that are going to get me consistent points. And Eckler kind of fits that mold. I also am in almost 30 leagues, and I don't have him in any other league. So if anything, it's hedging my bet a little bit. And I think you have to a certain extent.
I like that pick there, and I was actually you talking about taking him at 2.8. I was really considering him at 2.2. I knew there was no way he was going to make it to 3.11, but there at 2.2, I decided to go obviously Mike Evans, but I definitely considered it, and they really don't. like you mentioned already too, they really don't have anybody that he's competing with. He is more of a pass catching back. He could basically be that half of like what Christian McCaffrey is, but without the rushing. I'd imagine they'd want to bring in somebody that will handle the load on the ground. I don't know how he's going to be able to handle that in a full-time role. They do have the 37th overall pick in this year's draft. They also have the 6th or 7th pick in the draft. I don't think they're taking a running back that early, but they possibly could end up with one of the number one or number two running back in this draft, DeAndre Swift or Jonathan Taylor, somebody like that, and kind of pair him with Austin Eckler, which might not be great news for you because you have Eckler, but definitely for that Chargers offense would be not bad at all. Just
Yeah,
somebody
even
that
in general, even when Gordon came back, Eckler was everybody was really expecting Eckler to drop off last season once Gordon was back and kind of in the groove, but he really didn't. He still fit into that offense well. I think what they do in the draft will be telling to how much confidence they have in him. But
yeah.
overall, I still think he offers a pretty safe floor no matter what. And, I was one of those people, I didn't take him last year because I said, oh, Gordon's going to come back and you're never going to hear about Austin Eckler ever again. And here I am taking him in the second round.
I mean, I guess they didn't really pursue anybody. There was a couple,
Yeah.
not huge names, but there were some names out there. Todd Gurley being one of them. Kareem Hunt's still out there with a second round tender on him. Um, I mean, they could have easily brought Melvin Gordon back. They had what a $10 million deal for him, even in the beginning of the season. They could have offered it to him again. So they didn't really try to grab anybody. So I mean, they got some confidence in him. I think he's going to be a really good fantasy player, good pick in that spot, especially with the running backs that went after him. I mean, you can't really argue that at all.
Yeah, I did debate Leonard Fournette there. He's just one of those guys. I don't know. I don't know how long he's going to stay in Jacksonville. There's been talks that he may get an extension. He's had a little bit of an attitude there. I don't know if he fits in with the culture that they're trying to build, if there is any culture they're trying to build right now. But he was very effective in the passing game last year. Depending on what their quarterback situation looks like, I think Fournette could be, he has RB1 potential.
It definitely does. I mean, when he's healthy, he's one of the better backs in the league. He went a couple picks later. So right after you was DJ Moore, and then the next three after that were guys that you would love to have on your team, but also hate to have on your team. Mari Cooper, Leonard Fournette, and Odell Beckham Jr. round out the second round. Anything to say besides Leonard Fournette? Anything to say about those wide receivers that went? Or
I mean, I think Amari Cooper is a solid pick. He showed great chemistry with Dak last year. I'd say he's overall pretty safe. He's going to get you or wide receiver one, borderline high, wide receiver two numbers. DJ Moore, I actually really love in the offense this year with Teddy Bridgewater, with Matt Rule, with Joe Brady. I think him and Bridgewater are going to have a great connection and really fit in well together. So he went a little earlier than I was expecting, but I think realistically it's probably because of the new coaching staff.
and let's not forget, now people don't physically have this board in front of them unless you could make some video magic happen. But DJ Moore and Amari Cooper are these two guys wide receiver two right now. These are guys that took Michael Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins. So they're going in there with a pretty strong receiving cores right off the bat here. Finally have our first quarterback taken off the board at 3-1, Patrick Mahomes. There was no way he was making it out of the third round. I'm sure that 8 out of the 12 guys in this round were going to take him if he fell to him. I know I was going to take him at 311. Figured there was no way he was getting to me anyways. But if he was there, he was getting snagged up. I don't know what your thoughts are on him. Next was Julio Jones, AJ Brown, Kenny Galladay. If you're paying attention, that's 3 wide receivers for the third guy and 3 wide receivers for the fourth guy. They haven't touched a running back yet, so we'll get to that a little bit later on. And then it's back up to you for your fifth round or your 3.5 here.
Yeah, so I've mentioned running backs 1,000 times, and with all the wide receivers going off the board, it just made it harder and harder for me to take a wide receiver, just because I loved the running backs. I won't say all of them. I took Kenyon Drake with my third round pick. He's the guy in Arizona now, obviously with David Johnson gone. He had 800 yards and 8 touchdowns in half a season. Everybody's well aware of that. I'm playing for the upside there. I think I have 2 safe running backs with Zeke and Eckler. And if Kenyon Drake lives up to his top 10 potential, I could potentially have three top 10 backs, which is really kind of the strategy that I was going for. I'll take some wide receivers that we'll get to later that were younger. Maybe guys you're not like, oh, they're going to be studs, but given a year or two, a little more seasoning, I think some of the wide receivers that I took could be. I was actually going to take Kenny Golladay if he was there. He had a huge season last year. I think he can be a top 5 guy pretty consistently. But once he was gone, I think my decision was a little easier. I was a little surprised. I love AJ Brown's upside, but man, going that early in the third, I was surprised just because he didn't have a ton of catches last year, and I think his efficiency is a little unsustainable with Ryan Tannehill. He's not going to be able to catch 60 balls and get 1,500 yards this season. That efficiency is going to come down, which means he's going to need a ton more volume. And I don't know if the Titans offense has nothing to do with AJ Brown's talent, but I don't know if he's going to get the volume in that offense to really warrant him being. I mean, once again, this guy's wide receiver number 3, and that spot, I love that, but going in that spot, I think it's tough. His running backs are a little weak. So I would be a little nervous if I was him, but you can't deny him and Farron in the middle there. They have the 2 best wide receiver cores in the league right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Farron has a little bit better running backs. He picked up a couple in the next couple of rounds. Greg's running backs are a little questionable. Well, like I said, we'll talk about those when we get to them. Now, I've drafted with you a couple times. You're not a quarterback early guy, but was Mahomes making it past you?
He would have made it past me, yeah. And the only reason was that Lamar Jackson was still there. Lamar Jackson came very close to making it back to me in the 4th. And man, do I hate taking quarterbacks early, but if Lamar Jackson fell to me in the 4th, mid 4th, I mean, I had to take him, but I don't have a problem with Mahomes going that early. The reason being, I always feel like if you have Mahomes, he's the kind of guy that can single-handedly take you to the playoffs just because of the pure volume of points. And I feel that way with Lamar Jackson right now. Those are 2 guys I feel like I don't think the team with Patrick Mahomes is overly strong right now, but just because he has Patrick Mahomes, he will be in playoff contention. He might not be the best team. He might not be the worst team, but he's going to be a borderline playoff team just because of Mahomes. And whenever you have a guy like that, you can't really argue with picking him there.
Well, he's got Mahomes and he's got McCaffrey, and the way that the NFL is going to do their schedule is KC is going to be on a lot of Sunday night, Monday night games. So he's going to be going into those games needing 35, 40 points from his quarterback, and there's a very good chance that he could get it. Yeah. So, I mean, having Mahomes, and he's still young. He's only going into his third full season, 4th season overall. Next up, we have our first snipe of the draft. We got Cortland Sutton here. Reason I call that a snipe is because we have a guy in here that's probably the biggest Broncos fan in the world, and you knew you were. I mean, if this was involved with Vegas, you knew that Hunter was going Cortland Sutton here.
The odds were 100%.
Yeah, there's no more clear odds than that. But Ryan ended up sniping him. Then we had Travis Kelce, our second tight end, off the board. So this guy has Travis Kelce, Derrick Henry, and Chris Godwin. Very good start there. He actually is the guy that took Lamar Jackson in the 4th. So very, very good team so far. He's one of the top teams, I think, so far. Trio of wide receivers: Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs. And then it made it to me at Devin Singletary. I think that he's the 15th running back off the board. We were kind of talking about this before we got on. 15th running back off the board. I think that's a great spot for him. There's really not a running back after him that I'd prefer over Devin Singletary. As a Bills fan, living here in Buffalo, being involved with all the not involved, but like being on Twitter and listening to all the our local radio shows, you kind of get the sense that we might be looking at a running back. They were supposedly talking to Melvin Gordon. I don't think they had enough time to talk to Todd Gurley before he signed. He pretty much signed right away with Atlanta. But so with just the rumor of them talking to Melvin Gordon, you kind of have an idea that they're going to be bringing a running back in. But that really doesn't scare me at all. Singletary is going to get a bulk of the carries. We don't have a first-round pick. Our second-round pick is, I think, 54. So your top tier running backs are going to be gone by then anyways, unless we trade up. So we're pretty much going into next season with Devin Singletary, TJ Yeldon, who really didn't do anything here last year, Christian Wade, who's a turned rugby player who's on the practice squad, part of the international program thing that they got going on. So he might make the roster. I don't know. And then that's pretty much it. So he was the safest bet out of everybody that was left. I There's another guy that's in this league that didn't like the pick at all, or thought it was a reach. I mean, not necessarily doesn't like the player, but thought it was a reach. I don't agree with it. You don't agree with it, but I guess we'll just see what happens. I'm happy with it there. RB15, you can't really argue that.
Yeah.
Do you have any other words about it, or before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think the counter argument to that was he's a smaller back. He's not going to be in the league for a very long time. I mean, what running back nowadays is in the league a very long time?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any reason that at the worst that Devin Singletary can't be like Austin Eckler. Even if he's a guy that's heavily involved in the passing game, gets some big runs, he can still have 13, 1400 yards. We'll even say 1200 yards. If he's getting good volume with catches, coming off the board as running back 15, I don't think you can really argue with it because I think that he has a ton of upside, and I think his floor is pretty high in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't go out and make a big splash, he's pretty much going to be the number one going into the season. And they're trying to revamp that O line. They grabbed Stephon Diggs to help out in the passing game to go along with John Brown and Cole Beasley. So I mean, the offense it looks a little bit different than last year. It looks a lot different than 2 years ago, but it looks a little bit different than last year. It only looks better. So I think he could have a pretty good year here. Before we move on, I want to back up just a couple picks here. The first Ram was taken off the board, Cooper Kupp. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm huge on Cooper Kupp. Not really because I'm a Rams fan, but I mean, if number one, if you watch Rams games, I put a lot of stock into the wide receivers that quarterbacks trust. And when you watch, Jared Goff's going to be there, whether as a Rams fan I like it or not. I mean, with his contract, we don't really have a choice. So, but Jared Goff trusts Cooper Kupp. When he needs a big third down, he looks at Cooper Kupp. He has a great connection with him. I mean, he finished top 5 in PPR points last year. And to me, I've seen him pretty consistently being mocked at around wide receiver 15 to 20. And to me, I don't know what number he went in here. I think that'd be about right, probably right around wide receiver 15, it looks like. But I mean, if you're getting a guy, even if he finishes in the top 10, that's great value to me. He gets touchdowns, he gets targets, he gets the volume. There's really no downside to drafting Cooper Kupp, and I really don't understand why people take him in that spot, and I'll take him all day if he's going in that range.
He's a favorite target. Now you went running back heavy. Are you taking Cooper Kupp over any of the wide receivers that went before him?
I'm taking him over Stephon Diggs.
Which he did.
So we went I'd take him over Keenan Allen. I think, especially in a dynasty format, he's younger. I guess the Rams have a better quarterback situation at the current moment than the Chargers, with a question mark next to it.
Cam Newton's still out there.
But I'd take him over A.J. Brown at this point in their careers just because of the volume and the consistency. I'd probably take him over Courtland Sutton, even though I love Courtland Sutton's upside. Yeah, I mean, maybe a few guys. I'd probably put him right around that 10 mark. I think when I did my rankings, he was my wide receiver 10.
I mean, you're staying in this round, which is so for the most part, you're looking at him going in the third round. Now it could range, according to this draft, it could range anywhere between early third to late third. So, so at one way or another, you got him going in the third. I just want to back up even a little bit more. I did not even realize this.
Yeah, I know where
Jones,
you're going.
Yep, Julio Jones in the third round, third pick, second overall in the third round. Wow. I don't even know what to say about that. Like, he was a guy that I was considering at 2-2, and he went at 3-2. Any thoughts on that? I mean, he's one of the older guys that were taken in pretty much the whole draft so far up to this point. But yeah, I mean, besides age, there's no reason for him to be in the third round in a dynasty league or in any kind of league.
Yeah, I don't know. And this is the second startup dynasty that I've done in the past few weeks, and the other one he went in I believe, with the first pick in the fourth one. So he went even later in that draft, and I don't know because he's still not that old. He's 31, so it's not like he can't still be productive. I don't know if injuries are scaring people away, if people think that Calvin Ridley's slowly going to take a larger role in that offense. But yeah, I mean, it's a little head scratching. But when you look at the guys that went ahead of him, I'm not sure who I would take him over. When I look at it, though.
I don't like I said, I was considering him at 2-2, but Mike Evans was there. I do like Julio over Tyreek Hill. I'm probably in the minority there. So if Mike Evans went where Tyreek went, and I'm looking at Tyreek or Julio or Juju or something like that, I might have pulled the trigger on Julio. I'm not just gonna go just for young guys, even though I've went for just young guys so far. But if Julio's there, I think I'm taking him there. Atlanta's offense really didn't get worse. They they lost Austin Hooper. I Did they replace him? I thought they went out and got a tight end.
They traded for Hayden Hurst.
Yeah, so I mean they got a little worse there, but it's still like he's still a productive tight end. And they actually personally I think they got better in the running back department by
Mm.
losing Freeman and picking up Gurley. So I mean, I don't think Julio's going to drop off at all as long as Matt Ryan stays healthy. He's a MVP winning quarterback. They're going to sling the ball. They're going to have to keep up with teams like New Orleans. And I mean, Carolina has a good offense down there. Tampa Bay is putting together a really good offense down there. Well, they've had a good offense, but those NFC South games are going to be shootouts. So, I mean, you want Falcons galore, I guess.
Yeah. And going back, not to keep going backwards too much, but we didn't really talk about Beckham going with the last pick of the second as well. Do you think that's a good spot for him?
I think it is. People have a lot of recency bias. He didn't have the greatest season last year. I don't know. I mean, he's really not on my radar either. I don't know what to think about that Cleveland offense. That now that team is the team that ended up getting Austin Hooper. So that's another guy that's going to be coming in taking targets. Jarvis Landry is a target monster. Not as much as he was in Miami, but he's still getting a lot of looks. They got Nick Chubb out of the backfield. If nobody offers a tender to Kareem Hunt, they're going to have him. So you got just a bunch of guys fighting over one football. He has all the talent in the world. He's got a little bit of an injury history, not crazy though. As long as he could keep his head on his shoulders, he could be really good. And
The
we've seen
big
him be
key
really
word there
good.
is if he
If
keeps.
and if Baker Mayfield could kind of get his head out of his ass, I guess they can have one of the best offenses in the league. But everything just has to come together down there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. He's a guy, and I've mentioned it already that, or I sound like Chris Collinsworth right now.
Here's
Here's
the
a
guy.
guy. But I mean, I like to try to be a little safe, especially if you're trying to play for the long term here. I mean, you need to kind of mix in some risk with some guys that you know are going to get you points. And I don't know, in the second round, I think Beckham, he's too risky for me personally. I'd probably take him somewhere in the late third, early fourth, but you know, big upside though if he lives up to all the, he's no doubt one of the most talented receivers in the league, but it's just if he lives up to that hype and he kind of gets his act together, which I think is easier said than done, especially when you're in Cleveland.
Now, if you're mixing in risk with some guys that are going to get you points, then that's the perfect spot for where Beckham went because you got Christian McCaffrey and Patrick
Yeah,
Mahomes.
that's true.
So I mean, you got a Sunday night game with the Panthers and a Monday night game with Patrick Mahomes. You're down by 70. You got a chance to win. Finishing off the third round, we got Allen Robinson, who has a new quarterback thrown at him out there, Nick Foles. He's a guy that he's been getting a lot of targets. Do you think he's better with Foles than he was with Trubisky? Do you like where he was taken there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that based on the receivers left on the board, I think that's a solid pick. He got a ton of volume last year. I think he had 98 receptions off the top of my head. Um, he's one of those guys, though. He makes me nervous just because of the quarterback situation. I don't love Nick Foles. Do I think he's better than Mitch Trubisky? Incrementally, probably. But it's just one of those things where wide receivers obviously very dependent on the play of the quarterback to a certain extent. And It's not a great situation, but if he gets consistent volume, I think that he's a pretty safe pick there.
Yeah, I mean, he's like I said, he's been getting targets, and that's the number one thing that you want for wide receivers is targets. Starting off the fourth round, we'll only do two. We'll only do up to 5 rounds. So anything we'll do is we'll finish off the fourth and fifth round. We'll talk about some surprise picks from round 6 to I think we're in round 11 right now, and then we'll move on to the next segment. So we won't do the whole draft. We'll just do the top 5 rounds here. Maybe we'll pick a team or two that we like the best so far. But we won't go much further than that. I don't want to bore you guys with the whole draft here. We got DK Metcalf start kicking off the fourth round, and then I went DJ Chark. I was actually between 3 guys at this point. I knew I was going wide receiver. It was Chark, Metcalf, or Ridley. It probably would have been Metcalf if he was there, but so I had to choose between Chark and Ridley. I ended up going with Chark. I I don't know. I mean, he had a pretty good rep with Gardner Minshew last year. I think with a full when they get back to football, hopefully it's soon with a full off season and a full training camp and mini camp, just getting some more reps with Minshew that could help him out a lot. Um, on Johnson went next, and then Calvin Ridley went. So I mean, he wasn't too far behind where I was looking at picking Ridley, Michael Gallup, and then Lamar Jackson, who I know you have some things to say about him. So
Hmm.
he went there. If you want to pick up here, you can.
Yeah, so I talked about it before. I am 2 picks after this, and I was getting to a point where I'm like, man, I think that I'm gonna have to take Lamar Jackson. I'm gonna have to start the slide here, but I mean, with his rushing upside, that's a team right there with Lamar Jackson. I'd put money on that he's going to make the playoffs this year. He has a solid roster already with Godwin, Derrick Henry, Travis Kelce. That's a solid group right there. And then you added Lamar Jackson. I mean, I'd be pretty confident unless he does something catastrophic that he's going to make the playoffs. And that's why I can't really argue with taking a quarterback this early. When you start talking about Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, those next Kyler Murray, those next tier of guys, they're not guaranteed to carry you to the playoffs. I think Kyler Murray has that ability this season, but he's not as guaranteed as I love Lamar Jackson, so I think that it's a guarantee that he's going to have at least a few more big seasons. I worry about all his extra carries, but in the short term, he's going to carry you far.
Yeah, he's Brian's putting together a really good team right now. Kelsey is one of the older or not older tight ends, but he's the oldest guy on his team so far out of everybody that we've named. But he's still he's tight end 1, tight end 2. You can't argue with that at all.
Yeah.
But his top 4 picks it's probably my favorite team so far. But let's keep going here. Ryan took Melvin Gordon, and then you finally take your first wide receiver here.
Yeah, I mean, you messaged me and said that we do have to start wide receivers, so I decided at some point I should probably take one. I love Terry McLaurin. I was very high on him coming out of college, and I loved when they had Haskins already because they obviously had that rapport at Ohio State previously. If Haskins does continue to, so that's something I'm going to monitor. Um, obviously Haskins didn't look fantastic, but I do put a ton of stock into that chemistry. So do I think it's going to hurt him if they have a better quarterback? No, but it may take a little longer to build some chemistry there. But he's clearly their wide receiver number 1. They don't really have another option. They have Kelvin Harmon, Steven Sims right now. I believe they just made a small free agent signing of somebody. I can't
Don't
remember.
remember.
Yeah, it was somebody. It was a smaller player that they just signed, but he's clearly the number 1 guy, and we're starting to get to the point here with wide receivers where I don't really think there's many guys you're like, oh, okay, that's the number 1 guy. You're starting to get into a lot of 1A, 1B kind of situations. So
That's
he's
exactly
going
what
to
I'm
have,
saying.
yeah, so he's going to have the volume, and he's young. He's only 23 in a dynasty league, so it was a no-brainer for me when we got to that point.
Yeah, I mean, there's some rumors of Cam's not really a team rumor. That's more of a fan rumor. Cam
Yeah.
going there, but Tua going number 2 to Washington, kind of pulling an Arizona Cardinals where they draft a first round quarterback and then go draft another first round quarterback. So Tua could definitely help him out too there, or Haskins could just continue to grow and see if he can make a name for himself in this league. Up next, we got the two teams that are three wide receivers deep so far. They finally took their first running backs. Todd Gurley went to DeAndre Hopkins' team. David Montgomery went to Michael Thomas's team. So they're starting to round out a little bit better there too. They still have the best wide receivers, best wide receiver tandem so far. That's think about this question because I'm probably going to ask you which wide receiver tandem you like so far, but we won't answer that right now. Tyler Boyd and Tyler Lockett, a pair of Tylers, finished off the fourth round. I like the Tyler Boyd pick a lot. I like the Tyler Lockett pick a lot too, but Tyler Boyd is definitely he's now we don't know who the quarterback in Cincinnati is going to be. We don't know what AJ Green's situation is going to be if he's gonna play another year in Cincinnati, if he's going to be traded. He was tagged, so he can't really go anywhere on his free will. But AJ Green's going to be playing football somewhere in 2020 because there's no way he's sitting out a whole nother year. So if it's with Cincinnati, then that Tyler Boyd pick it's a good pick. I mean, because some of the focus of the defense is going to come to AJ Green. If it's not with Cincinnati, then Tyler Boyd's the number one. So it's kind of a win-win right there. Any thoughts on those running backs or those Tylers?
No, I mean, I agree on Tyler Boyd. I think he was a very underrated last season, too. He had a ton of catches. He had good volume. If the quarterback play improves, that's only going to help him out. For the two teams that took the running backs, I mean, it was kind of the best that they had. Marlon Mack's on the board, who I think has a little bit of potential as well. But, I've talked about Todd Gurley a little bit, who's one of my all-time favorite Rams. But I think he's at a point in his career where he doesn't really, even though he's only 25, I don't think he has a ton left. But he's going to get the volume there in Atlanta. So at that point, not a bad pick. Same with David Montgomery. He's young. Yards per carry last year, he struggled a little bit, but I think that was more of a product of the offensive line, which still needs to improve. And if it doesn't significantly improve, I don't love that pick, but I do think David Montgomery has potential to be good.
And maybe Nick Foles could open it up a little bit. We'll see what happens there in Chicago.
Question mark.
Yeah. Then going to the fifth round, like I said, this will be the last round that we talk about. Marlon Mack was the first pick in the fifth round. I have a feeling that if he made it two more picks to Greg, he would have been picked there and kind of given him two running backs there, but he didn't. Adam Thielen, Deebo Samuel went to Greg, so Greg has four wide receivers at this point. Chris Carson went to Ferentz, so now he's kind of building, kind of getting some equality there. Three wide receivers, two running backs. Robert Woods, little homer pick right there. That's you next. Talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, so the few picks before kind of led to this pick. The first being, I really was confident Deebo Samuel was going to be there because I said there's no way that two teams with three wide receivers are going to take another guy there. And I love Deebo Samuel this year. I think that he's probably going to be he's going to be one of the main pass catchers there. We'll see if they add any other targets with Kittle, but he's going to get a ton of targets. He really came on at the end of last year, and I think with more seasoning, he's going to be fantastic. Chris Carson, he's one of those guys I can never get behind. Chris Carson every single year. I think about Rashad Penny still, and I know that's crazy, but it was such a head-scratching pick to me when the Seahawks took Rashad Penny in the first round. For those that don't remember, they took Rashad Penny in the first round, and I just still think back to that, and I can't see the Seahawks spending draft capital, a team that usually does very well in the draft. I can't see them spending high draft capital like that on a guy that they're not going to use. So Rashad Penny did show some potential until he once again got hurt last season. But I don't know, Chris Carson, and he's consistently been a top 10 back when he plays, but he's one of those guys I can't get behind. Robert Woods, so for me, I was looking once again kind of for a safe wide receiver. Terry McLaurin, I think, is more of an upside guy, with Haskins being a little questionable. I don't deny that McLaurin could flop a little bit especially for being my first wide receiver. So I was looking for a guy with a little more consistency. Woods actually had a huge season. He was a top 15 PPR option last year, which I don't think a lot of people realize. He only had a few touchdowns. I remember in the group chat last year we were talking about, was Robert Woods going to finally score his first touchdown? It took him long enough, but naturally, I think he only had 2 or 3 touchdowns. He's going to have a few more than that, I would hope.
Yeah.
So I would expect him to go back to the mean in a positive way. But he's going to have high volume. He's going to have 80, 85 catches in that offense, 1,100 yards, 5, 6 touchdowns. So he's a safe pick, I think, at that point.
For us fantasy players, the Rams just need to phase one of those wide receivers out so we know. It's like, I mean,
Yeah, and I think Brandon
hopefully it's
Cooks is going
Cooks,
to be
but
gone. Yeah.
like Cooper Cup, Robert Woods. I mean, we want to pick them. We want to pick Cooks too, but it's like every week you could have somebody different leading the team in targets and receptions and all that. And then one week you could be Tyler Higbee, and it's like you got two Rams wide receivers, and all of a sudden their tight end is the one that gets the three
Yeah.
touchdowns in the game. They need to start phasing some people out and helping us fantasy players out there.
Yeah, and I think they might be even more pass happy now that Gurley's kind of, unless they have a secret plan at running back, I think they are going to be extremely pass heavy next year.
They should just draft somebody with their first round pick. Oh, they don't have one.
Yeah. Do they ever have a first round pick ever again?
Can Jalen Ramsey play running back?
Ugh, gosh, I hope not.
Next, we have a little bit of a run on wide receivers here. Jarvis Landry, which not a surprising pick at all. I've drafted with this guy a couple of times, and Jarvis Landry is another one of his guys. He always goes to him. He always talks about him, so I wasn't really surprised there at all. Devontae Parker went after that. He had a huge
Ooh.
year last year, career year. Finally, he woke up. He's been a sleeper for 5 years. Finally woke up last year. Christian Kirk, who's taken a little bit of a backseat with the DeAndre Hopkins trade, and Larry Fitz coming back from one more year, but that's a good dynasty pick right there in the 5th round, which is also the guy that picked him. He has no Broncos up to this point, so he's doing really good right there. The next
Baby
pick, actually,
steps.
yeah, I mean he's not homering in this draft. The next guy picked Philip Lindsay, and that's his second running back there. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. It's a little early for me, especially because they went out and got Melvin Gordon. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, so kind of going through them. Jarvis Landry, I think it's a safe pick. You mentioned him previously. He gets a ton of volume, and at this point in the draft, there's a lot of value in guys that get volume. Devontae Parker, who I booed at, he had his big breakout season last year, obviously, but
He's just gonna get better.
yeah, I don't. I'm just not a believer. He has the talent, but when Preston Williams was healthy last year, he was something like wide receiver 48. I mean, the numbers never lie to me. I always say that numbers are the only thing that have never lied to me. And it's just one of those things where when Preston Williams played, it's a known fact that Devontae Parker was not a great, didn't get a ton of volume. I think he only had 6 targets on average. That spiked up to 10 targets when Preston Williams wasn't playing, and he was wide receiver number 6. But they're going to have more weapons. Preston Williams is going to be back. I'd imagine that they're going to add another weapon, and the more they spread the ball around, I just don't see him being a top tier. Now, with this pick, I'd say with the other options available, it's not a bad dart throw to kind of hope that he keeps that production up because he was a top 10 play for the second half of the season. So if you get that kind of production at this point in the draft, that's great value. But I'm not a Devontae Parker believer. Christian Kirk, I think they're going to spread the ball around a ton this year. Good upside, though. Philip Lindsay, I kind of have the same thoughts as you. There's not a ton of running backs left at this point either. I probably would have taken a guy like David Johnson just because he's going to be the bell cow. Not that I love David Johnson by any stretch of the imagination, but and I mentioned this previously that they traded so much for David Johnson, they have to use him. Otherwise, they're going to look ridiculous.
Yeah.
And as silly as that logic sounds, I mean, Bill O'Brien is making some of the decisions with trading and playtime. I mean, it's going to factor. I don't care what anybody says. Bill O'Brien will never admit that publicly, but he cannot. You can't look stupid in that deal. So they're going to try to get as much as they can out of David Johnson. But Philip Lindsay's probably going to be heavily involved in the pass game. I'm a little nervous to see how that situation shakes out. I'm staying away from Lindsay and Gordon, but once again, when the running back's on the board, I can't argue with it too much. Maybe I would have taken James Conner, David Johnson above him, but none of them are surefire options.
No, not at all. Lindsey to me is kind of like Chris Carson to you. I just I like Chris Carson. I kind of tend to stay away from Philip Lindsay. I haven't really been a big fan of him. I know he had the big breakout rookie year, undrafted rookie year. I don't know. I mean, I can't do it. I don't really have any big reason for it. I'm not going to be going after any Philip Lindsays this year. And I haven't last year either. Mike Williams went at pick 10 of the fifth round. We got a third quarterback off the board in Kyler Murray, which I mean, it's my pick, but I personally like it because of everything that we've said
I
about
hope
him.
so.
Yeah, he's got the potential to be a top 3 quarterback this year. I mean, his odds even jumped up after DeAndre Hopkins was traded away from Houston. So like that kind of bumps Deshaun Watson even down a little bit more. And now Kyler Murray has DeAndre Hopkins, so I think Kyler Murray is going to be up in that Mahomes and Jackson tier. And I don't think he's going to go out there and throw 50 touchdowns, but he's 30, 28 to 30 touchdowns, 10 to 12 interceptions, and getting some rushing touchdowns and a lot of yardage. That's it's going to be a good year for a fifth round quarterback here. And then Mark Ingram ends what we're going to talk about as far as the top 5 rounds. He goes at 512. Who now besides Brian, besides Castle Black, who's your favorite team so far? Who do you like so far here?
So Castle Black, I mean, I think he has a solid team. He's the team with Godwin, Henry, Kelsey, Lamar Jackson. But I will say his running back situation makes me extremely nervous. So it's not a team that I personally would be thrilled with. I mean, obviously Lamar Jackson, great value. But if his running backs don't pan out, if Derrick Henry ends up breaking down, which is possible, or he ends up holding out, or whatever, if Derrick Henry doesn't live up to expectations, that's his RB1. David Johnson, who we didn't get to because he picks him after, but he that's his RB2, and David Johnson has the potential to break down as well. So he potentially has really no options at running back, which I think could be an issue. So as much as I like his first few picks and I think he's one of the winners, I think as we go along in the draft, it becomes a little weaker. You see who else here.
I'll fill in the space here. I might have to go with
go
team 1. The team that picked Christian McCaffrey, he's got Patrick Mahomes. He's pretty much has now. Like I said, I like Saquon Barkley a little bit over McCaffrey, but they're kind of like a 1A, 1B. I'm not saying that he's far and above McCaffrey, but you can arguably, in most leagues, you're going to have McCaffrey go number 1. So you can arguably say that this guy has the number 1 quarterback, the number 1 running back, one of the top upside wide receivers, another wide receiver who kind of took over starting role unless they go out and grab somebody in Will Fuller because of the DeAndre Hopkins trade. Now, if he could stay healthy, that's a big if there. His running back situation isn't as deep as some of these other guys, but in a league where you only have to start 2 and then you can start up to 5 wide receivers, he doesn't really have any like I said, he's got Odell Beckham Jr., he's got Tyler Lockett, and then he's got Will Fuller. So he's already got 3 good wide receivers there, 3 potential number 1s for their teams. But the number 1 running back and the number 1 wide receiver, or number 1 quarterback are huge there, and they're going to put up massive points. So I like the way that his team is off to a start here. And I think he grabbed, just going further down the list, he did end up getting a tight end, TJ Hawkinson, which I don't hate that pick at all. If Matt Stafford could stay healthy, get him involved in the offense there, he likes to sling the ball 5,000 yards. So that's a pretty solid pick there in the 8th round. So he's rounding out very, very nice so far, but over just the first 5 picks, I think I like him a lot.
Yeah, no, and I'll mention a few teams here. I know there's someone in our chat that mentioned the first 2 teams aren't overly strong, and I mean, actually, I think I disagree with that a little bit. I'll talk about Team 2 a little bit, who took Barkley in the first round, and you talked about him a little bit. Arguably, and I don't disagree that he could be the first overall pick. I think he does have more upside, but McCaffrey may be a little safer at this point. But really, they're 1A and 1B to me right now. So he got Barkley in the first. I do think Leonard Fournette was good value at the end of the second. I mean, because I've seen him go in the early second, late first, even in a lot of drafts. So to grab him at the end of the second, I was surprised actually he fell that far because he's the clear cut number one. That team is going to want to run the ball. He's involved in the passing game. So he had two really star running backs right off the bat. And then moving on, we talked about Julio. That's a great value for his third pick. Tyler Boyd, who I think is going to get a ton of volume. We didn't really talk about his third wide receiver that he grabbed, but Adam Thielen is their clear-cut number one in Minnesota now with Stephon Diggs gone. So his wide receivers are going to get a ton of volume. He has two stud running backs. So I think the first five picks he did a good job with. I think Farron at pick number 4, solid. I like his wide receiver. You mentioned earlier who has the best wide receiver core. I would pick the fourth pick there with DeAndre Hopkins, DJ Moore, and Kenny Galladay. Not obviously Michael Thomas over DeAndre Hopkins, but I think DJ Moore and Kenny Galladay kind of take it over the top for me. I think Hopkins, Moore, and Galladay, those are three guys that have the potential to be top 6 options in PPR leagues. Hopkins worries me a little bit because I think they'll spread the ball around more and his volume might go down, but he'll get enough volume to be a top 10 receiver easily. I already mentioned DJ Moore in that offense, and Kenny Galladay showed a ton of potential to be a big-time option. So I think he did a good job with his wide receivers. I'd still be nervous about having Gurley and Carson as my running backs, but if they're able to at least be solid for him, he should have a good team moving forward.
And he's got one of those top 5 quarterbacks. Like I said, we haven't talked about these rounds, but he's got one of those top 5 quarterbacks in Deshaun Watson. He's got one of those top 10 tight ends too in Mark Andrews, especially after they traded Hayden Hurst. So that's going to be. There was a lot of times last year where I was watching Ravens games and I had Mark Andrews, but I didn't have the other two, Nick Boyle or Hayden Hurst. And it was like I was just looking for Mark Andrews' number on the field, and he'd be off the field, and the other two would be in there. So now at least this year, there's 1/3 of that tandem gone, and hopefully they keep it that way. But I think Mark Andrews has a huge year this year. Now
but honestly, go ahead.
I was just gonna move on to the next part, picking some players in the later rounds. But go with what you were gonna say.
I was just gonna say overall, kind of diving into looking at everybody's roster. I would say overall, there's not many teams that stand out like, okay, that's the team to beat. I think a lot of these teams are actually really well-rounded. There's not really a team that I look at that I'm like, that's a completely terrible, no chance at doing anything team. I think usually I look at rosters, I'm like, there's no chance that team's going to do anything. But I'm not really looking at any of these rosters and seeing, oh man, they're done.
Yeah, there's not really any super bad teams. We had, as we mentioned, we really didn't talk about it too much because we haven't really had these picks yet, but it's an IDP league. The first IDP off the board was Darius Leonard. Bobby Wagner was the only other one. So we haven't really had many IDPs go, which you're not really going to see that much of anyway. So it makes a lot of sense. 7 out of the 12 teams have quarterbacks. One of them has 2 quarterbacks so far, but 7 of us have quarterbacks already. So that's kind of a different league than some that I'm used to. Obviously, the earliest one was Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd round. Had a little bit of a run on them in the 10th round with Wentz, Prescott, and Josh Allen. Actually, in reverse order, it went the other way: Josh Allen, Prescott, and then Carson Wentz. We've had a bunch of tight ends go. Almost every RB1 and RB2 is gone. It looks like we're getting into like the wide receiver 2s and even the wide receiver 3s so far. I'm seeing who like Anthony Miller, Hunter Renfrow, Randall Cobb. I mean, those are all guys that could be on their. I mean, Randall Cobb's on a new team now, but the other 2 guys, they can make some big splashes with Anthony Miller with his new quarterback. Hunter Renfrow started to come on at the end of last year, so hopefully they stick with David Carr. I like David Carr or Derek Carr a lot. Not David Carr. He got sacked a lot of times. I like Derek Carr a lot. I think that, and he started to get a little bit of noise there with Hunter Renfrow. I'm actually And I don't want any of our guys to see this because obviously we play in a league with them, but I'm not seeing Tyrell Williams yet. I'm surprised Renfro went before Williams. You don't see him, do you?
Nope, he's still on the board. I'm looking. I'm in the app right now.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's not a huge deal because Hunter Renfro could end up being the number one there, but
Yeah.
and they could also draft somebody with their first round pick that they got. I think they pick at 12. So you're looking at around the range of CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy. So Tyler Williams could be on the outside looking in, but yeah, I mean he's still out there available. Um, any later round picks that so far we're into the 11th round, halfway through? Any later round picks that you're surprised at, that you're kind of surprised that either A, they fell that far, or surprised that wow, they went that high?
Um, I'd say there's some of the wide receivers at this point. I mean, you're starting to throw darts at them. I would say there's a few that I know a lot of people were surprised with my Darius Slayton pick in the 6th round. I love Darius Slayton, but everybody was saying that was the reach of the draft so far. But the dynasty format, I don't think it's unreasonable. Redraft league, I will not be taking him in the 6th round. Probably right around the 10th for me, but um, I think the philosophy is a little different here. But but I think it's a lot of dart throw wide receivers. You already mentioned Randall Cobb. What is he going to do there? They signed him to a pretty big deal. You would think that they have plans to get him involved. I was a little surprised to see Deshaun Hamilton come off the board. I don't think he really has a defined role in that offense for the Broncos yet. Corey Davis, who you didn't mention, I think that's an interesting name.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see if they do anything else at wide receiver. But he has the potential to be that kind of Devontae Parker player who it's been every year like, oh, this is Corey Davis's year. And I think a lot of people are like, yeah, screw Corey Davis. He's a 15th round pick at this point. But I mean, he still has the talent. And if Ryan Tannehill is able to provide consistent quarterback play, I mean, Corey Davis could be a really good pick later in the draft. A lot of the running backs coming off the board. I see a lot of pass catching guys starting to come off the board, really one dimensional. Tariq Cohen, Hines from Indianapolis, Tevin Coleman, whose role isn't really defined in the 49ers offense, Malcolm Brown, who is really not the name people are talking about with the Rams, but he has the potential. I mean, he's listed number 1 on the depth chart right now. Obviously, they took Henderson last season, and he didn't really perform well. But at this point, I think Malcolm Brown's probably going to have an opportunity to start there unless they add a decent back in the draft. So I think that could provide good value as well.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off what you said about some of these wide receivers coming off. Deshaun Hamilton, you already mentioned. I mean, the couple of Broncos fans that we have in our main chat, and then a whole bunch of mocks I've seen have like a Henry Ruggs or somebody going at 15. So it's like, where does he fit in? N'Keal Harry was a questionable one for me going in the 9th round there. I mean, we don't know who's throwing him the ball. You went with Julian Edelman a round before him, which, I mean, it's a safer pick than N'Keal Harry, but again, we don't. And I don't think like the new quarterback is going to come in and completely omit Julian Edelman, but he's definitely not going to get the usage that he had with Tom Brady. 3 Carolina receivers are already off the board. Like we mentioned earlier, Robbie Anderson was signed to them, but DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, and Robbie Anderson are all gone. So it's like the Rams situation all over again, where you could have one of them have a huge game, and then the next week they'd be a complete dud, and we'll never know who it's going to be week in and week out. DJ Moore is the safest one. He's probably the best one, but then it's between Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel. Which one of us? I have Samuel. Brian has Robbie Anderson. Which one of us is going to luck out that week?
Yeah.
I really like your Deontay Johnson pick. I know you've talked to him offline a little bit to me, and just in general in our main chat, he's got the potential to be a stud, and hopefully Big Ben could stay healthy, because that Pittsburgh offense it goes through him. We've seen it last year. They made a push for the playoffs with Mason Rudolph and stuff like that, but they're not going to go anywhere with Rudolph or anybody besides Big Ben unless they go draft their next guy. But if Big Ben could stay healthy, then you got your Vance McDonald's, your Juju Smith-Schusters, Deontay Johnsons. Hopefully it opens up James Conner. I mean, that Pittsburgh offense can go. But yeah, I mean, this draft is turning out really nice. One final one I want to say is Emmanuel Sanders. He's now Drew Brees' number 2 going in the 10th round. That could be a steal right there. That's, I mean, you're lined up on the other side of the arguably the best wide receiver in the league right now, and you're getting your number 2 in the 10th round. So that's good value, good pick right there.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's move on to the next thing that we wanted to talk about. We'll do our giveaway that we did. So one of our admins was running a giveaway for a Fantasy Holics T-shirt. Basically, it's a black T-shirt with the silver writing. Is that what you have on right now?
Yeah,
Well, you have the hoodie, or is that the shirt or the hoodie?
this is a hoodie, but yep, same
That's
logo
what it
though.
looks like. Yeah. So silver logo, black shirt. There was no purchase necessary. All you had to do was share the share the share the thread, and name your favorite player in all of sports. So like I think we had a Ken Griffey, we had I don't remember all the names. I could bring them up. Do you remember any of the other players that were mentioned?
Yeah, I think David Wright was on there. There's a few baseball guys, mostly football, but there's a few baseball sprinkled in there.
And that's nice to see too, because primarily coming from a football page, it's nice to when we ask like generic questions like that or put out a baseball article. It's nice to see people react to that. So we're kind of learning that people are into these other sports and into fantasy sports, and we should have expanded earlier. But hopefully we could turn things around now and kind of get everybody into it. But so there was about 20 names here. It wasn't a huge contest. I mean, it was unlimited, so anybody could have entered. We didn't really get a lot of action on it, but nonetheless, we're gonna run it, and you got a better chance of winning if you were in it because there's not a lot of names. So what I'm gonna do is I entered all the names into random.org. It's a randomizer that you could just go put anything in there and then it'll randomize. I use it to randomize draft orders sometimes if I need to do something real quick like that. I'm gonna hit it 3 times, so it's not gonna be the first time. It's not gonna be the second time. It's gonna be the top name on the third time that's gonna win. And I'll just mention the name here. To be honest with you, I have a Mac, so I really don't know how to take screenshots or anything like that. So I can't physically take a picture and show you who the top name
That's why you
is.
never get a Mac.
Yeah, it's my wife's fault. It's my wife's fault. But so I'll mention the name that won, and then we'll go out and contact you tomorrow because it is getting late now. We'll go out and contact you tomorrow, find out what your size is, and get that shirt sent out to you. So here we go. Randomize one again. And again. Okay, so the winner is going to be Jeremiah Fairfield. And if we want to go back and find out who we put as his favorite player, I don't know if you're able to do that or not. But Jeremiah Fairfield is our winner. We will get in contact with you if you're watching this. If you're watching this podcast, when you get the shirt, maybe take a picture of you wearing it or post it on there. Hold it up. You can cover your face if you want. That doesn't matter. Just show us with the merchandise. Jeremiah Fairfield, congratulations on winning basically Fantasy Holics first contest that we have. Another
Babe
contest
Ruth, by the way.
he had Babe Ruth. Perfect. That's
Babe
a good
Ruth.
player. I'm sure
that he saw him play with his own eyes.
Sure, he went to a game in New York. Well, congratulations, Jeremiah. We'll get in contact with you. Another contest that we got going on right now, we kind of teased it last week, but it dropped today. It's physically out right now. It's a draft contest that we got going on, and now that it's out, we could explain it a little bit more. And if I forget anything, just let me know. But basically, there's a sheet where you just do a mock draft of the first round. The teams as it stands right now are already in there. So it has the Bills trade from 22. Now it's Minnesota's pick. It has San Francisco's trade from 13, or Indianapolis's trade from 13. Now it's San Francisco's pick. Or is that right? Well, whatever it is, it's correct now. I don't have it in front of me. I'm sorry. But if you go into the sheet, basically you fill it out. Picks 1 through 32. You can't change the team names. You just put the player that you think is going to be selected in that spot. Every correct team and player is worth 1 point. So if you think Joe Burrow is going 1 to the Bengals and he gets picked first overall to the Bengals, that's 1 point. If you pick a team that trades out of that spot and they end up picking a player that you chose for them, so if you pick Tua to 5 for Miami and they trade to 2 and take Tua, Washington's old pick, you get half a point. So you're still correct on the pick, just not in the right spot. And vice versa. If you pick a player going into a spot, but it's not the team that picked there, so if you pick Tua going to 5, but ends up being Tampa Bay trades up to 5, then you also get half a point there. So you're not doing any of the trading. All you're doing is just picking the players 1 through 32, and then there's 3 tiebreaker questions at the end. Yeah, so you can max out at 32 points plus the tiebreakers, or 16 points if you only get all half points or whatever the case is. And then with that, you're going to win a Fantasy Holics t-shirt and a prize package of your favorite team: Bills, Dolphins, Giants, Packers, whatever your favorite team is. We'll get in contact with you. You'll get a prize package for your favorite team, along with a Fantasy Holics t-shirt. And if there was anything that you wanted to add, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think overall though, it's created in Google Forms, so it's a very simple form to fill out. So if you're worried about it being a complicated process, it's very straightforward. All you have to do is input the player for each pick, and it's a very easy process, and it gets submitted directly to us. So you don't have to worry about copying, pasting, or emailing it directly to us. And I think we're excited. It's our first contest that we're running that's a little more interactive. So I think we're looking forward to getting a good number of submissions for it.
Yeah, you have from now until the draft. The draft is on Thursday, the 23rd. The date hasn't changed, so the draft is still going on Thursday, April 23rd. Um, so get your submissions in. If any other first round trades happen between now and we'll have to put a deadline on it, but if any other first round trades happen between now and we'll say that Monday, so the 19th or whatever it is, we'll update the board. But anything after that, unfortunately, is just going to be what it is on the 19th. So if Cincinnati decides to trade out tomorrow, we'll change that pick tomorrow. Other than that, that's pretty much that contest. So it's on Fantasy Holics page right now on Facebook. It's also on the Fantasy Forum, which is another Facebook page, a more interactive one. And finally, what we got going on is we wanted to talk a little bit about some kind of fun leagues, some additional leagues, not just your basic redraft or 2 quarterback or dynasty leagues. We'll let you kick it off, Jordan, in the one that you kind of won last year. That was the Guillotine League, right?
Yep, the Guillotine League. Yep. So essentially how it's formatted, if you haven't played in a Guillotine League before, there's 16 teams, and essentially whatever team scores the fewest amount of points, they're eliminated from the league for the season, and then all of their players become free agents. So everybody, it's a little bit, and I played the strategy from the beginning. It's funny. I think you always go into a league with a strategy, and sometimes it ends up disastrous. But this is one time where actually I played through my strategy, and it kind of worked to a T. And I think as we move through the season, you and I talked about it quite a bit last season. You're like, you have a good chance to win this thing because teams started dropping out. But yeah, so essentially it's a little strategic though, because we play with FOB. I think the budget was a little more in our league. I want to say it was 150 that we started with.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, you have to play the strategy of you don't want to blow all your money in the beginning. And that's essentially what I did. My team was I did not draft well at all. I'll be the first one to tell you. After that draft, I said, man, I might get eliminated week 1.
Well,
But
you picked like 16 or so, right? Or 15?
yeah, I was 16. I had the back-to-back, and I took Zeke because people didn't know if he was going to sign, and that turned out really well for me. And then I took Juju on the back-to-back there, and we all
Which
know
didn't
Juju.
turn out too well for you.
No, that was terrible. And then on the next, I think, not my next back-to-back, but the back-to-back after that, I took Melvin Gordon, who didn't play the whole season and then wasn't fantastic when he played. And then I also took AJ Green on a risk. So, I mean, it really was a disastrous draft, but I still ended up winning the league. I was, if you look back at it, I was towards the bottom of the league for the first 3 weeks. I mean, I think I was second to last by a few points, and it was a Monday night nail biter. I'm like, man, I'm going to get eliminated. But what happened, I saw people were blowing their money early on. So they saw that if a team got eliminated and Saquon Barkley was available, that's fantastic. But they would blow almost their entire budget to get Barkley. And I said, okay, but if you get eliminated, Barkley's going to go right back in the pool.
Yeah.
Just because you're able to blow your money and get Barkley once, that doesn't mean he's yours for the season. Because if you get eliminated, I'll have another chance. So I would say, I forget the exact week, but it was really early, like week 6, 7, 8, right around the halfway point. I was the only one that had more than like $20.
Yeah,
I
you
think
could pretty
everybody
much bet
had
on anybody.
everybody had, I think the next highest 19. I had like $121. So in the middle of the season, all of a sudden I was like, okay, I know that this guy's only got $19. So McCaffrey went on. I think he was the first one that I got actually. McCaffrey halfway through. I bid like $21, whatever the amount was. It was a very low amount. So I had McCaffrey, and then all of a sudden I had Dalvin Cook. Then I had Lamar Jackson. I had Travis Kelce. I had the top player. I had Michael Thomas. I had the top player at every single position because I could outbid and get the best players each and every week from whoever was eliminated. And that was my strategy, was just kind of hang around, hold that budget on. And, of course it can be catastrophic. I could have been eliminated any of the first 3 or 4 weeks, but I slowly put my team together because I think this is the kind of league it's a marathon rather than a sprint.
Yeah.
And, it's a little nerve wracking because you're like, okay, and I'm not even exaggerating when I said I think the first week I came in second to last, and I believe I only scored like 50 points. I mean, I barely scored anything. But I think you have to be patient, trust the process. That's for Joel Embiid, and just let it play through and hold on to that money. And at the end of the year, and not to mention, as you go through the year, you do have a better idea of who's playing really well. So right now, everything that we're talking about, it's speculative. We can say that Kyler Murray is going to be a top 3 QB, and I believe that sitting here right now. But if he looks disastrous the first half of the year, he's really not worth anything. So by halfway point in the year, you have a good idea of who's worth bidding big dollars on, and you can really build your roster from there.
Trying to see it on my phone what the how the weeks went, but probably have to bring it up on the computer because it doesn't really show up well on the app. I'm trying to see, but one thing that you forgot to mention though is the lack of bench space, which is very important. We played with So the way that the league was set up was we had one quarterback, two wide receivers, two running backs, a tight end, and two flexes. So you're already deep starting rosters, but then the bench was only four, which is why you had to be very strategic with how you spent your money and who you spent your money on. Now, obviously, you went into the draft and you drafted Melvin Gordon, knowing that he was probably going to be on your bench, not playing, and then you drafted AJ Green going into the season with the injury. So two of your four bench spots right off the bat were just basically waste of space, zeros. And then I don't know when you got rid of AJ Green, but the longer you held on to him, he basically wasted one of your four bench spots, 25% of your bench spots up until you actually got rid of him. Which, I mean, it ended up working out for you, but you got to be kind of it avoids people from hoarding players, and then it also it makes you think about what you want to do with your lineup and kind of think, okay, Saquon Barkley's out there, but he's up against, or if he's eliminated the week before his bye week, it's like, do you want to blow all the money on him and then not have him next week, or do you want to blow all your money and then have him go up against a good rushing defense like the Patriots for a week or so? Those are different strategies you got to look at too, but the four bench spots I think is very important.
Yeah, and you really can't be married to names. So I remember having that problem with Melvin Gordon specifically. AJ Green, I think I dumped. He was one of my first drops. But even though you take a guy early, I mean, you can be eliminated from the league at any point.
Yeah.
And you can't really be concerned like, oh, he was my second round pick. If he's not performing, you really don't have time to mess around with it. And that's kind of what I did in the beginning. I played matchups for the most part. I think I dumped most of the guys that I drafted before week one just because I was looking to play matchups. But you have to, every angle that you can think of to get an advantage, I think you have to take that up. I didn't take the bench spot portion too seriously. I think that's a very valid point, but I placed more emphasis on the starting lineup. I was essentially just dropping guys in my starting lineup and plugging them in from the waiver wire. Maybe not the greatest strategy, but as long as you're playing those matchups, you're strategic with your dollars, I think it can still work out.
And it did for you. I mean, you obviously won the league, so no issues there at all. So that's a good league to consider. You could, if you have a large group or a larger group of friends, get 16 guys together. You're actually supposed to play with 17 people because it goes to the last week, but Yahoo only lets you play with 16, and that's why we ended up only playing with 16. We had a 17th, but we were on the wrong platform. I think you could do it on, might be able to do it on Sleeper, but Yahoo only allows an even number of teams.
Hmm.
Um, Moving on to the next league, which was another fun one that we did this year. It was a best or not best ball, a vampire league, and this one, a little bit of a funny story. So basically, what happens is 11, you got a 12. It's a 12 team league. You can make it 10 if you want. So an even number of team league, but only the first one person does not draft, and then the other 11 people or 9 people do draft. So just for the sake of how we want to explain it, we'll just say a 12 team league. So 12 team league, the 12th team, if it's a random draft order, the 12th team is essentially the vampire. If you want to do it any other way, draw a name from a hat, draw a vampire. But basically, the one vampire, whoever is assigned the vampire, does not draft. Teams 1 through 11 do the regular snake draft, so 11 actually gets the back-to-back picks in the first and second round, and then at the end, the vampire basically gets to build their team of the remaining free agents. Excuse me. And there's various variations to this, and there's different rules that we're probably going to implement next year. But from what we've seen online, is the main 11 teams, they don't get any transactions throughout the year. The vampire, he can pick up and drop whoever he wants throughout the whole year. When and it goes on, basically the vampire plays each team. He gets to choose his team every week. First, I think what was it? The first 3 weeks, you because there was something where once you get into a certain week, you could only play each team once. When did that start? I forgot that part of it.
Yeah, so you had to play every single team once, and then once that happened, you could start doubling it up.
Okay, so weeks 1 through 11, basically the vampire is choosing his opponents, but he could only play each team once. If the vampire beats his opponent, he gets to swap a player from his starting lineup to the opponent's starting lineup. So you couldn't swap a bench player. You couldn't swap a quarterback for a running back. It had to be an even swap position. I actually, and we'll get more into the rules, but what I did was
Yeah,
I
let's
thought
talk about what you did.
I thought my team was pretty good to start. I forgot what position I picked out of in the first round. I think it was 6 because I ended up taking David Johnson, which was going into the season. I thought it was going to be a good pick, but ended up not being a great pick. So I was in the middle of the draft, I think, to begin with, and I was looking at the waiver wire. Sammy Watkins was out there. Maybe Dak Prescott was out there. I don't remember who else they had. I could go back and look. But basically, I called out the vampire and I said, "Hey, if you play me week 1, I'll let you set my lineup. Like it has to be a legit lineup." I think I had Austin Eckler, I had David Johnson, had another like kind of middle of the road running back, but like they were high upside running backs, not really studs, but high upside running backs. And I told him set my lineup, and you play me week 1, you can set my lineup. He ended up getting Sammy Watkins off the waiver wire, who went off for 3 touchdowns in week 1, and that kind of just destroyed me right there. But he also had a pretty good game from a couple other players, and I kind of just had my foot in my mouth the whole time, and I basically ruined the league because he was able to grab my best player right off the bat, and then he ended up winning week 2. Um, I don't think anybody else let them set his lineup,
Yeah,
so
and he
that's
took Eckler from you, correct? I
it.
believe
Might
that's
have
what
been.
he took week
That's
1. Yeah.
yeah. I think it was that clear because I know he ended up with he at the end of the season he ended up with a really good team. But it's so moral of the story is don't be cocky. Just let the vampire pick you to play when it's your turn. Because he actually I think it got around to me playing him again, and he took another player from me too. I think he might have took maybe on Johnson, or maybe I got on Johnson from him. I don't remember, but it was bad news for me right off the bat, and kind of bad news for the whole league because he kind of just made his team stronger right from week 1, and I don't. He didn't end up winning the league, but
I think he
he ended
finished in third.
he ended up winning more games than what the vampire should do. But I mean, if you're a strategic vampire, there's you could win some games and make it fun and interesting. But yeah, I mean, if there's anything you want to say about it or explain the rules a little bit better, because I kind of went off on a tangent. But yeah, it's a fun league, and I would definitely do it again. But I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the first things that I want to say is we had a lot of trauma throughout the season in this league. And not that I'll dive into too many of the specifics of it, but there's a lot of different formats and a lot of different rule changes you can make within this. And I think it's important to play with a group of guys that are kind of all on the same page, like, hey, this is fun and we're in this together. And I think for the most part we had that, but I think that's just the first note that I want to make on that. The second is I think be very conscious of how many bench spots you have because it's very so my season ended up terribly in this league. I had the first pick. I took Barkley, who had some injury problems last year. But I mean, I forget how many bench spots we had. It was only 4 or 5.
It was like
And
one less than what the starting roster was because we you
yeah,
basically the one bye week if you didn't draft correctly, the one bye week you definitely had one open spot on your starting roster. So I think it was one less. If we had six starters, then it was five bench.
yeah, and that's tough too because when you're trying to take a backup kicker and defense, and that's how our vampire, how they won a lot of games once bye week started. They started picking opponents that okay, they didn't have a kicker or defense that week, so I'm going to play them. So they took any small advantage, but that's the strategy that really you have to use. But I would personally expand the bench a little bit because you have to remember that you don't get to pick anybody up if you're not the vampire. So there was points in the season where I think we had the 5 bench spots. I think I had 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a tight end, I believe. So I didn't have a backup kicker or defense. So during that, I tried to be strategic. I picked a kicker and a defense who had the same bye week, and I
That's what I
actually
did.
I got lucky, and the vampire didn't even pick me that week because I think somebody else had the same thing plus injuries. But there was quite a few weeks with not even considering buys. I had so many injuries where I didn't have a tight end. I think half the season. I think both of my tight ends got hurt. I had Gostkowski who was on IR last year, and we allowed for an injury exemption so I could replace him. So I did have a kicker, but then I didn't have a tight end because both my tight ends were on IR. My wide receivers were hurt. Barkley was hurt. So there was a few weeks I wasn't playing a running back or a wide receiver or a tight end, not because I wasn't paying attention, because I didn't have an option. Everybody that I
Yeah.
had was injured, and I think I finished in second to last in the league. And uh, you know, I didn't get too frustrated because there was nothing I could really do. I think one of my strengths in fantasy is the in-season management and working the waiver wire. And when you're not able to do that, it's challenging. So I think that's something we're going to have to reevaluate in our league because we're definitely going to do it. I think everybody in that league has expressed interest in doing it again. But I think one thing we're really going to have to consider is number one, how we handle injuries. Because in a situation like that, I think that I should have probably been able to at least fill out a lineup minimally. But even if we just increased the bench, I probably wouldn't have had as many issues as I did. And obviously, that's an extreme circumstance. But I mean, realistically, when you have that shallow of a bench, it's not too hard to fall into that scenario.
Yeah, I don't even know what the perfect strategy is for going into that league because I went into it trying to pick not even just my kicker and defense with the same bye week, but trying to pick a whole bunch of players from the same bye week. I think the Lions had the same bye week as like the Rams or something, so I went with Rams defense and Kenny Galladay and on Johnson or something like that, and
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I'm basically sacrificing week 9 or whatever it was, but then it got to week 9 and a couple of those players missed time, and it just ended up being not good in the end. But it's definitely a fun league. Definitely want to do it again. There's definitely have to alter some rules though, alter some things there so we can actually. I mean, the vampire is kind of at a disadvantage off the bat, but if they get lucky one week, then that's even one week could kind of turn the season around.
Mhm.
So definitely have to kind of even the playing field there, and I think we can definitely we're a smart group of guys, and we can definitely make that work. Um, anything else with the Vampire League that we might have forgot?
No, I don't think so.
All right, then another league that it's a little bit more popular, a little bit more common. We've been seeing a lot of them pop up, especially within the last year or two. It's called a best ball league. Best ball is basically you. It's another 12 team league or so. I mean, you can play with 10 teams if you want to, but it's a regular draft. It's deeper rosters though, deeper bench. You basically draft, and then you don't set a lineup and you don't make any moves at all, and then you accumulate points throughout the season based on how your guys do, and excuse me, I'm sorry, the best lineup that you can put together each week without you actually setting the lineup that's your lineup. So it's basically top score. Um, there's different ways to do it, especially since I ran two last year. I did a playoff way, and then I also did a top score way. The top score way is the more common way. You just accumulate points throughout the season, and if you're the top scorer at the end of the season based on what your best lineup was, then you win. But I did a playoff way where it was the same way, but you just week 14 you played somebody in the playoffs, and then continued on until week 16 or maybe 17, I think it was. But yeah, so deeper benches, you don't touch your lineup at all. Any injuries, if somebody gets injured, I mean, there was some leagues that I drafted before the season or before preseason last year, and Andrew Luck retired, and I was kind of stuck with Andrew Luck on my bench. So, I mean, you want to grab like two or three quarterbacks. You want to grab two or three tight ends. You want to grab in the leagues that we did, there was no defenses or kickers. If you do defenses and kickers, then you want to grab two defenses. You want to grab two kickers. You want to account for those bye weeks. But you want to have players at every position and multiple players at every position so you can account for bye weeks, account for injuries, account for upside, account for downside, and just hopefully put the best roster out there each week.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the appeal of best ball leagues, there's a lot of people, me not being one of them, that don't want to go through the daily grind of setting their lineup. They just kind of want to draft and let the season play out. And I think that's the reason why it's been growing in popularity because there's a lot of casual players out there. Not everybody is as intense as we are. So, it's the same appeal as daily fantasy. You can just play when you want, kind of throw a lineup in here and there, but even less with best ball. So, there's not a ton of strategy, in my opinion. Well, I won't say you got to make sure all your bases are covered. Once again, I like to, similar to when I talked about Dynasty, but you can have a bunch of dart throws, but you have to remember if none of those guys work out, I mean, you're kind of screwed because you can't really drop them and pick them up. So I think you have to mix some guys in there, like an Austin Eckler, who in a PPR format, he's going to get you points. Michael Thomas in the first round, taking him, that he's going to get you solid points. And then okay, I have a little more room for risk later in the draft based on my early round strategy. But, I think sometimes, and I get caught in this sometimes too, as I love taking young rookie second year players later in the draft that are the ultimate dart throws, and they may end up having a huge season and making me a championship contender. But realistically, I probably drop most of them after 3 weeks. So
Yeah.
in a best ball league, you can't do that. So you really have to make sure you're kind of mixing and matching your lineup appropriately. And it's a one time too. I don't usually handcuff my players, but I don't mind it in a best ball. So if you have Ezekiel Elliott, there's nothing wrong with making sure you have Tony Pollard because you're going to have the Cowboys starting running back in that scenario.
Yeah, I think handcuffing is probably one of the biggest things in best ball, and just making sure. I made the mistake last year, and in one of them, there was actually an app that had best ball leagues. I think they're not around anymore. You're able to transfer all your funds over to FanDuel, so they don't exist anymore. But I did a league last year, and I ended up picking one quarterback, and then I ended up picking another quarterback because he kind of fell to me, but he ended up having the same bye week as my one quarterback.
Mm.
So then I had to pick a third quarterback that I made sure didn't have the same bye week. And I think one of those quarterbacks was Andrew Luck, and he ended up retiring, and I ended up being quarterbackless for 1 week. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention in that regards, and also just picking guys that now you obviously can't plan for injuries, but you don't want to go into a season with, say, like Ben Roethlisberger and I don't know, another quarterback that gets injured often, or somebody like Ryan Fitzpatrick that might get pulled because a rookie comes in and they want to see what he does. So you want upside, but you also you don't want to be stuck in week 12 and have zero quarterbacks playing for you.
Right.
So, were there any other leagues that you could think of? I mean, another league that we did, which is just basically a regular fantasy league, was we ran an XFL league. And if you have the time and if you have any kind of Google spreadsheets knowledge, you can run your own league, and you don't even have to find a platform like Sleeper or Yahoo or ESPN or anything like that for it. You can basically run it yourself, and that's what we did with our XFL league. If you guys want to see pictures or video on how we did it, we can definitely show you. But if you want to throw something together for just like anything, I mean, we're even thinking about, with the lack of sports right now, thinking about running a Madden fantasy league right now. We already have it set up on the app, or on Google spreadsheets. We just got to put the players together and get a draft together and have something going, just so we have some kind of fantasy, because we don't know how long this is going to last. But you can do that with any kind of sports. If you wanted to set something up and just kind of just pass the time that way. And I mean, it's more prominent now, but even if you're not a big baseball fan and you want to do something over the summer when sports are all in full swing, it's the end of the hockey season, basketball season, it's the middle of July, and you want to, oh man, I'm itching for fantasy football. You want to throw a fantasy Madden league together. You can do that as long as you know how to use Google spreadsheets and make it all work that way. Anything that you wanted to add to that, or any other leagues?
No, I don't. Not really. I enjoyed doing the XFL. I'm sad that the season got shortened. The reason that I liked putting it together manually, and there was a few platforms that kind of put together a makeshift way to play XFL. I
Yeah.
didn't really dabble in it at all. But the thing that I really liked for the XFL was we're actually going through and inputting the stats. And especially in a startup league like that, it kind of gave me the opportunity to dive a little deeper into the league, rather than me just setting a lineup. When you have to put in, okay, he had this many catches, this many yards, you start to see trends and go, okay, Dan Williams has been pretty good the last few weeks. He had more targets. And, of course, you can do research on your own, but when you really have to manually put in the stats, it kind of gives you a different perspective on things.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, I hope the XFL comes back next year. Definitely want to do it again. We already have the platform set up for it, and and even if they do run other platforms like they started to this year, we're already so far into it. We already set it up, got even all the navy blue and red colors in there that you just want to you just want to do it yourself anyways. I mean, it's part of the fun of, like, this is, if I was heavy into fantasy in the mid to late 90s and doing it in pen and paper, I would have loved that. I would have loved to just go out to Denny's or something and sit down with the newspaper and put stats together.
Yeah,
But
that's so funny. So I actually started off that way because I've been playing since the early 2000s. I started when I was 8 years old, actually, with my dad, and we used to do the stats every week, and we would look in the newspaper, and it's a little different now. I
yeah.
remember waivers used to be a really big deal because my dad, there was a few times where people yelled at him because he wanted to put in a waiver claim, but he was ahead of somebody else, and they said, "Well, you can see all the waiver claims," so it's a little bit of a different game now.
I think that's all we got for the different leagues. I mean, there's plenty more out there, and we're even putting some together now too, that we just been brainstorming, putting some different how can we make this league different, or what can we do that's different than just going out drafting and playing. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to you having a team full of players and them getting points for you and you winning or losing, but just to make different elements of it fun. And that's what we've been thinking about too. And it's always fun to just put those ideas together, and I'm excited about the future of that. But unless you don't have anything else, I think we'll do our exit and we'll get out of here. And we're running a little long anyways. But so that's basically it for today's show. We did go over a lot, but I think it was very fun. I mean, there's not a lot going on for sports right now. A couple trinkling last minute signing, well, not really last minute, but like
I'm
just
getting
like,
twitchy over here.
yeah, where we just want to just keep on doing drafts and stuff. I mean, like, we set this league up 2 days ago, and all of a sudden we're a third of the way done with the draft because people just wanted to draft. So you're getting the money in your Venmo like instantly because, like, hey, let's get this going. And yeah, it's fun to actually, like, to get some normalcy, to get back to some kind of football, even though we have no date on when it's going to start yet. But the draft is still on scheduled time. Hopefully, the schedule release is still on scheduled time. At least we could talk about that when the schedule comes out. And I mean, hopefully the world is just goes back to normal, but hopefully football comes back at the time it's supposed to. I don't know how much I could deal with a pushback as not as important as it is as what else is going on right now. I don't want to see them be pushed back at all. But that's it for our show today. Just follow us on Facebook, Fantasyholics. Follow us or check out our website, thefantasyholics.com. Check out our Twitter, Fantasyholics1. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. You got it.
Fantasyholics1. Okay. I keep on forgetting if it has the in front of it or not. It does not. So Fantasyholics1. We are working on getting the one removed. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, just check us out. Check us out on social media. Check out our website. And if you like anything from this video, if you want anything in writing, if you want those leagues, the league rules in writing, feel free to hit us up, and we'll be able to get you anything that you need.
Yep. Subscribe on YouTube as well.
Yes, that's probably important too, because that's what we're on.